During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union prepared for a war many believed would end the world. The governments carved bunkers into mountains, buried nuclear missiles beneath quiet little forests, and they built military bases in some of the remotest places on Earth. Now, officially, these facilities were designed for one purpose: surviving nuclear war. But according to some theories, that's not the whole story. So, tonight, we're going to explore 3 Cold War locations surrounded by secrecy, conspiracy, and unanswered questions.
I walk through silence, thick and cold, where shadows drift and time grows old. No voice to call, no path to take, just fog and fear with every ache. Souls in the fog.
We're going to begin with a mountain in Virginia where the U.S. government prepared for the end of the world. Hidden beneath the Blue Ridge Mountains lies one of the most secretive government installations ever built in the United States. This facility is known as the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center. For long before it became a Cold War bunker, the mountain had a very different purpose. In the early 1900s, the site was home to the Mount Weather Research Observatory, directed by meteorologist William Jackson Humphreys. The scientists launched weather balloons, massive kite systems high into the atmosphere, all to study weather patterns and the upper air conditions. Now, for decades, it remained a quiet, scientific facility. But after World War II, that changed. As tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated, American leaders began planning for something unprecedented: the possibility that Washington, D.C. might be destroyed in a nuclear attack. Now, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, he believed the government needed a way to survive such a catastrophe. So, in 1954, the United States Army Corps of Engineers began secretly excavating tunnels deep inside of Mount Weather. The project was known as Operation High Point. The engineers blasted enormous caverns into the rock and reinforced them with thousands and thousands of steel anchors. And by the end of the decade, the mountain contained a hidden underground complex large enough to house hundreds of people. And inside you had dormitories, you had medical facilities, you had communication centers, water reservoirs, generators. They even had a television broadcast studio in the mountain. So if nuclear war destroyed Washington, government leaders could be evacuated, and at the mountain they could continue operating the country from underground. Throughout the Cold War, officials conducted secret evacuation drills to test the system. Now, in a real crisis, helicopters and aircraft would quickly transport key personnel out of the Capitol into the bunker. For decades, the facility remained almost completely unknown to the public. However, that secrecy would change in December of 1974. On December 1st, Transworld Airlines Flight 514 was approaching Washington Dulles International Airport during some bad weather. The aircraft was a Boeing 727 commanded by Captain Charles Gilbert. During the descent, the crew misunderstood instructions from air traffic control and began descending too early. At 11:09 p.m., the aircraft struck the side of Mount Weather. All 92 people aboard were killed. The rescue crews that had responded to the crash, they quickly discovered something was definitely amiss here. There was something unusual nearby. A heavily guarded government installation. Not on any of their maps. So the accident drew media attention to the mysterious mountain facility. Journalists had begun asking questions about what exactly was hidden beneath Mount Weather. Now, years later, the bunker would be activated during a real national emergency. On September 11, 2001, after terror attacks struck the United States, government officials were evacuated from Washington as a precaution. and some of them were taken to Mount Weather. Now, this Cold War bunker had been built for the worst-case scenarios. But rumors soon began to spread that the facility served darker purposes, which it's the government, so it's believable. Some believe Mount Weather housed a secret shadow government, the group of officials chosen in advance to take control of the country after a nuclear disaster. Now, some other claims are that the bunker was far larger than the government actually admitted, that it extended miles beneath the mountain, potentially connecting to other underground facilities across the American landmass through maglev rail systems. And according to another theory, the complex could even function as a secret detention facility during national emergencies. For decades, speculation about what might really exist beneath Mount Weather has continued. Because if Washington were ever destroyed in a nuclear flash, the people running the country might disappear into a mountain. Much like the ant people of the Native American lore. They'd be a lot cooler if they went and stayed there. Let us have our world back. And nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest major city lies one of the most remote archipelagos on Earth. Franz Josef Island sits in the Arctic Ocean, surrounded by drifting sea ice and months of darkness each winter. Sounds like fun. Long before it became a Cold War military outpost, it was known for something else: exploration. One of the most determined explorers to venture into this region was Georgy Sedov. Now, Sedov was born in 1877 in a poor fishing family near the Sea of Azov. He didn't begin school until he was 14 years old. Now, despite that late start educationally, Sedov quickly showed talent in navigation and maritime studies. And within a few years, he had joined the Imperial Russian Navy and began participating in Arctic mapping expeditions. Now, at the time, reaching the North Pole was one of the greatest challenges in exploration. In 1909, American explorer Robert Peary claimed to have reached the pole, but many people have doubted that claim. Sedov, he believed that Russia should attempt the journey itself. So, in 1912, he organized himself an expedition to reach the North Pole and plant the Russian flag there. The expedition departed aboard a ship called the Svetoy Foka, and almost immediately the mission ran into some trouble. The vessel had become trapped in the Arctic ice near Franz Josef Island, forcing the crew to spend months stranded among the islands. Supplies running low, members of the expedition had begun suffering from scurvy. Now, Sedov himself had become very ill, but he refused to abandon the mission. And in February 1914, despite his worsening condition, Sedov set out by dog sled with 2 companions to attempt the final journey to the North Pole. But he would never make it. Weeks into the journey, he collapsed and died on the ice. His companions had buried him in the frozen Arctic before deciding to turn back. Decades later, the same islands that Sedov struggled to survive on would become strategically important for very different reasons. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union realized that the shortest route between the United States and the Soviet Union passed directly over the North Pole. So any nuclear war between the two superpowers would likely send bombers and missiles across the Arctic. So the Soviet military began establishing bases in the remote northern territories. One of the most important locations was Alexanderland in Franz Josef Island. There the Soviets built Nagurskoye Air Base, one of the most northernmost military installations on Earth. Temperatures often drop below negative 40 degrees. No thank you. For months every winter, the sun didn't come up above the horizon. Yet Soviet personnel lived and worked there, operating radar stations and monitoring aircraft moving back and forth across the Arctic. Because of the extreme isolation, very little information about these bases was available to outsiders. The secrecy eventually gave rise to a number of theories. Some researchers believe that the islands were used to store nuclear weapons far from the populated areas. Others claimed hidden missile installations existed beneath the Arctic's ice. And according to one theory, somewhere among the islands there was a Soviet base that had been suddenly abandoned, with equipment still intact, sitting exactly where it had been left. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many Arctic installations were deserted. But in recent years, Russia's returned to Franz Josef Island, rebuilding parts of the Nagurskoye base and expanding its Arctic presence once again. Because during the Cold War, both superpowers watched the Arctic skies for the first signs of nuclear war. And on these frozen islands at the edge of the world, Soviet forces sat and waited. Deep in a quiet forest in Lithuania, there's a place where nuclear war once waited silently underground. Hidden beneath the trees are 4 massive launch silos. During the Cold War, each one contained a nuclear missile aimed at Western Europe. The site is known as the Plokštinė Missile Base, a name I've had to say 100 times. Dyslexia just keeps getting me there. In October 1962, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union reached an absolutely dangerous point. American reconnaissance aircraft had discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. The world entered what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, across the Soviet missile network, bases were placed on high alert. At Plokštinė, soldiers received orders to prepare their missiles for possible launch. Inside the underground control rooms, technicians checked guidance systems and ran their emergency procedures. Launch crews rehearsed the sequence they would follow if the order arrived from Moscow. And all the while, above them, the surrounding forest remained completely silent. The nearby villages had no idea that nuclear missile bases were hidden beneath the ground upon which their children played. And for several days, those soldiers waited. Then, fortunately, the crisis ended. The missiles never got launched, and the base itself had only been built a few years earlier. Construction began in 1960 inside dense forests that now form part of the Zmecha, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, National Park. The location provided natural concealment and allowed Soviet missiles to strike targets across Western Europe within minutes. The engineers had built 4 enormous launch silos roughly 30 meters deep, and inside them were R-12 Dvina medium-range ballistic missiles. Each carried a nuclear warhead capable of destroying an entire city. And for nearly 2 decades, the base remained operational. And the missile crews lived nearby and constantly maintained these weapons. If the orders had come, they would have had only minutes to prepare the missiles. In 1978, the Soviet Union decommissioned the base. The missiles were removed and the facility was abandoned. And over time, the forest would begin to reclaim the area. Today, the site has been turned into a Cold War museum. But the launch shafts do remain exactly where they were built. And like many Cold War installations, Plokštinė has attracted its own conspiracy theories. Some believe the 4 silos are only part of a much larger underground missile complex. Others claim that the base once stored dozens of nuclear warheads hidden in nearby bunkers. And according to one theory, commanders stationed at the base may have had authority to launch missiles if contact with Moscow was ever lost. And if that were true, a small group of officers in a Lithuanian forest might once have had the power to start a nuclear war. For nearly 2 decades, nuclear warheads sat hidden beneath this quiet forest in Lithuania. And if the order had ever come, the first sign of war might have been 4 rockets rising silently from trees. Now, the level of secrecy during the Cold War by the Soviet Union and the United States created the perfect conditions for conspiracy theories of all kinds. So how much of these stories is actually true? Well, at Mount Weather, the bunker itself is very real. It was built as part of the U.S. continuity of government system and has been used during national emergencies. However, there is no confirmed evidence of a permanent shadow government living inside the facility, but that just means that they don't live there. And claims that the bunker extends miles beneath the mountains appear to be exaggerated. We wouldn't know the truth for ourselves unless they open the facility to the public one day, which is pretty unlikely. Now, Franz, Josef Island, Soviet military bases did exist and played an important role in the Arctic defense, but there's no credible evidence of hidden nuclear missile sites buried beneath that ice. Now, these bases were primarily used for radar monitoring, aviation support, and Arctic operations. And at the Plokštinė Missile Base, the 4 nuclear silos and the R-12 missiles they once housed are well documented. However, there is no evidence that the forest contained a larger hidden missile network. Now, while Soviet missile crews followed strict launch protocols, historians believe Nuclear Launch Authority remained tightly controlled by Central Command in Moscow. Still, these facilities were very real parts of the Cold War strategies. They were built because leaders on both sides believed that nuclear war was very possible. Now, fortunately, that war never came. But the bunkers, the Arctic bases, the abandoned missile silos, they remain as reminders to just how close the world has come. For decades, the Cold War forced governments to prepare for a future they hoped would never happen. Hidden bunkers waited beneath mountains, remote bases watched skies from the edge of the Arctic, and nuclear missiles sat silently beneath forests, ready for orders that might never come. Most people living their ordinary lives during that time never knew how close those preparations came to being used. But scattered across the world, these places still exist. They're all sitting, quiet, some abandoned, some still active. And built for a war that, at least so far, hasn't happened. Alright, we hope you enjoy the Cold War locations. These secret places were some interesting research. I didn't know about the missile bases in Lithuania under a forest. That was pretty neat. But I've got a few more Soviet and general Cold War episodes that'll be coming up, so keep your eyes open and follow along. Hit that subscribe button, give us a like, follow, and share. And we'll see you for the next round.